Hello, and welcome to our fifth episode of Bot Boundaries, where we explore what it means to be human in the age of AI.
Hey everyone, today we're discussing the role of women in AI innovation and development. And in this episode, we'll explore the intersection of artificial intelligence and gender, from representation and bias to leadership and opportunities. We'll examine the latest research, global reports, and real stories showing both the challenges women face in AI and how they are shaping the future. Jackie will also highlight a female founder she saw speak at CES, and we'll close out with some keep it or skip it around hot topics around women in business and tech. As always, my name is Katie Wilson, and I'm here with Jackie Gutierrez.
Hello, everyone. I'm excited to discuss this important topic.
Yes, me too. This is one that's been on our radar for a while. So I'm excited. Obviously, we're not going to cover everything women in AI. There's been a ton of discussion around this topic, but I just wanted to pull a couple recent articles and recent themes we saw, and then we can take it from there. But definitely, this is one where we might have a follow up in the months to come. So I wanted to start with an article last year from Forbes that I got a lot of attention around why AI development needs more women, and here's what leaders can do about it. We'll also link to all of these articles in the podcast descriptions if you guys want to check it out, and we recommend you check it out yourself and read them as well. One major stat it pointed out is that only 31% of AI professionals are women. AI expertise is also really, really low in AI research, with all male teams authoring 75% of scientific publications. That was a huge one for me that really stood out. And then it found when we compare and contrast women in leadership positions in AI, women value more responsibility, stronger ethics, and enforcement of that when they're engaged in the development. And gender bias can develop, of course, when we don't have women or other folks represented when we're developing and testing this. So there's a lot of good examples around this. I think what this really pulls out is the importance of having diverse teams when you're building something. And then I pulled out a really good example of that from Apple Health. So Apple Health is something a lot of people use. I use it myself. It can link to workouts, it can link to Peloton or other third parties you're using. But one of the things it didn't have when it launched was menstrual cycle tracking, right?
So important.
It tracks your heartbeat, it tracks, your workouts, all of these really important health things. But when it launched, that was not included. And actually users complained and said, hey, we want menstrual cycle tracking as an important part of our health, and let's include it. And we trust Apple with that security. And you saw the proliferation of a lot of third-party menstrual cycle tracking apps come out around the time of Apple Health because they forgot to include this. So I do think if a woman was on the development team and we're talking about health, that would have been one of the first things I would suggest we track. But so obvious, but just really missed the mark. And from a huge company like Apple that I know has pretty diverse teams, right? It can even miss the mark there. So just imagine a startup with no women, right? And 3 guys. So this is really important. And I think something we need to consider when we're developing product and to get the best product out there that people are going to use.
Definitely.
Yeah, another really recent example in the news and a really, tough one, I think, that's been out there a lot is just recent examples of Grok's failure to protect against showing inappropriate images of women and children. And people are asking it to undress pictures of people underage or women. That's completely inappropriate. And there should be guardrails in place to prevent that when someone's asking it that. So why is this happening? And why isn't it getting fixed quickly? We got to look to the people in charge and the people that are putting the guardrails and the rules on these AI agents. They don't exist in a vacuum. They're built by people, and people control them. So I think those are 2 good examples. One probably a little more horrendous than the other of why it's so important to have women at the table.
Gosh, yes. So much to unpack there, and we could expand on. Yeah, I mean, just when we're building, whether it's AI or business in general, when we have more people, more voices at the table, yes, for one, it's about values, it's about ethics, but it also equates to dollars, and it equates to ROI and higher revenue. And so it's everyone benefits from having more diverse minds at the table in every way possible. So that was a really good one to pull. Thank you. So I'm moving on to a Stanford study that found that AI systems can amplify gender and age stereotypes, especially against older working women reminding us that bias isn't just an academic concept, it's encoded in real systems. So, to understand how these biases about women in the workplace are perpetuated by generative AI, researchers prompted ChatGPT to generate more than 34,500 unique resumes for 54 occupations using both typical male and female names. And the results were unfortunately stark. Surprising, I'm not so sure. So, when ChatGPT produced resumes for these hypothetical women, it generated work histories that portrayed them as younger and less experienced. The researchers then asked ChatGPT to evaluate the quality of the resumes. When it considered the experiences and ages it had woven into these imagined resumes, it gave older men the highest ratings, even when they were based on the same initial information as women's resumes. So that's unfortunate, disappointing, but shows an opportunity. Like, I'm sure there's so many for us to improve on and put some guardrails in and get more diverse voices involved. And, it's just one example of how bias can creep into these systems and how important it is for women to be a part of the development and testing processes to increase parity and fairness of the results, especially in hiring and HR. So good to really be knowledgeable about this and have research on this and test on all of this. When I was at CES, I met this data scientist from Google. She was fabulous. Your old stomping grounds,
Yay.
Katie. Yeah, we just dove into the conversation as both being mothers and being, just few women in a sea of men at CES. And I talked about how it's important to have our perspectives and everything that we're building. I use generative AI to develop software. She is a data scientist at Google and really supports the sales team. And we just talked about how sometimes some problems, there's an easy answer. You could just ask a human and you could just ask a woman and she has the answer. Literally, you don't need to ask AI even.
Absolutely.
It was a really fun conversation, but it's true.
Yeah. And I think this is a really good example I liked because it's one of the easy use cases that even if you're not super technically savvy, people are uploading their resumes to ChatGPT all the time and asking for improvements on it. And this is a little disheartening if you think, oh, just because my name is feminine, you're going to devalue this resume and you're going to change it. Whereas if my name, like if I put Ken versus Katie, now all of a sudden I'm going to get a different output. I'm like almost want to challenge myself and upload my resume with 2 different names and see what it says. Because I think, that's just showing that there can be inherent bias in these systems and we're not always all getting a fair shake. And I think, oh, great, it optimized my resume, but it really de-optimized it. So I think it's always good to cross-check your work, always good to use different platforms. And in this case, something, that we'll look at going forward on how these systems perceive gender based on the data they have.
Exactly. And this is really just the next step that really represents our society, humanity. A test that was done back in the day before we were all using AI and LLMs, when there would be tests done where people would submit multiple resumes, whether it was an African American changing their name to a very Caucasian sounding name, or a Latino changing their name on a resume to a Caucasian sounding name or European sounding name.
Mm-hmm.
And there really was, a difference in the amount of calls for first interviews or
Absolutely
interest in their resumes. And so this is being perpetuated on these LLMs. And so, the same thing we've learned over many decades and how to have awareness and sensitivity to these needs. It needs to continue on to these systems we're building.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually thought of that study as well when I read this. I was like, wow, this is like the modern example of that. Well, now for a more positive take, there was a recent PwC piece that made the case for how AI can be adopted to accelerate gender equality in the workplace. So I love this as like the flip side of it, of like, actually, we can use these tools to accelerate fairness. And they talked about using AI actually to remove bias in the hiring process. And depending on the prompts you're using, can we make this more equitable and fair in the hiring process? So I think AI can also be the solution for this issue. Delivering more personalized skill development at scale was a huge one that's more accelerated and easy to do with AI versus saying everyone needs the same training, right? It can know a lot about me and quiz me and figure out something more personalized. I think that's great. More immersive learning environments. It actually has been shown that women develop and learn better in more immersive learning environments versus a classroom
Yeah.
setting. And AI is a great example of that. When they surveyed, the surveys in there were very interesting because they found that women were actually less concerned about losing their jobs to AI, but also less optimistic about AI creating more opportunities for them. So I found that
Interesting.
a really interesting like juxtaposition of, yes, I feel like I'm safe with my job. And that could be the kind of roles women have in the workplace that are more, essential or less back end, right? Or less technical, perhaps. It depends. Like it
More
didn't really get into the
operational.
departments. Yeah. But then also saying, I don't see this actually accelerating my career or giving me opportunities, which I think is the downside of that. Like, I think
Mhm.
there is a lot of opportunity for both men and women across the board with AI, but it takes adoption and education around it. So I think there's certainly ways that AI can be incorporated into business systems to make them more fair, but those true gains, like we've said before, will only really be for those who can balance the creativity and problem solving with their knowledge of AI. And so I don't know if this like it really got into the details that I wanted to see, like a true case for AI benefiting women, but it had some good examples of advancement for good, which I think, is what all businesses strive for or should strive for in terms of retention and like we said, having equal voices at the table. So I think it'll be interesting to see in the years to come which companies lean into AI internally and how they're able to make that a way to retain women, to train women, and to bring, more fairness into the hiring process.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. All of that. So much good stuff there. I mean, we're hearing, there's so many headlines, which we keep talking about around AI is going to take your job.
Yeah.
And, we are hearing about there are massive layoffs planned, layoffs are happening. I start to wonder, like, for the Amazons that might be laying
Mm.
off, I don't know the data of the exact positions, but are those warehousing positions because they are bringing in more autonomous machines to do some of the work? I don't even know, but I just wonder,
Yeah.
what layoffs are truly because of AI. Are they using AI as an excuse because they don't want
Mm.
to report that the economy is actually a factor?
Yeah.
We should dive into that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of noise, so it's hard to see, like, even, looking for data around, like, what percent of layoffs were women that was affected by AI,
Mm,
which was interesting. In that study, women didn't feel as threatened, but not as optimistic, right? So, and then which new job creation is funded by AI? We know a lot of the new stock and stock upside. I've seen studies about how what huge percent of that is AI driven companies, which is very plain to see, right? That if we
yeah.
didn't have these AI driven companies, the stock market would be in the tank right now. So I do think that's interesting
So
to
much
see.
speculation.
Yeah, and to see like how much job creation was done by AI versus or other like business functions.
Yeah, yes, yeah. I wonder why women feel I mean, I do feel confident. Like, I
Yeah,
know
me
it's a
too.
challenge, right? Yeah, good. I mean, yes, it's a challenge that we're faced with, but a lot of women tend to be in sales and operations and really crucial inflection points in
HR.
organizations that really require that human touch, right? So,
Yeah, and I really view, like I said, like the skills of the future to be this blending of like my own personal knowledge, problem solving, history, and business that I bring to the table, plus being able to use these tools in combination, right? So the tools can be an outline or save me some back end time or save me some operational time. But my thought process, my creativity, and the strategy I'm bringing to it is not outsourced to AI,
yeah,
and couldn't be, right? So I think like that's the part of like being confident in
definitely.
the skills you're building, the true business skills you're bringing to the table, and then how AI is just augmenting some things, some parts of that to have you work smarter.
Yep, definitely. Well, good. I'm glad we feel good right now. So I want to take a minute, to highlight a truly fabulous founder and CEO named Raquel Urtasun of Waabi. So I was at CES 2026, and it's important to highlight, this awesome founder. She was on a panel and just so impressive. She's also a professor at the University of Toronto, and honestly, she's one of those people who just make you sit up a little straighter when she talks because her work is just that impressive. So she, at her company, she uses artificial intelligence, especially deep learning, to help vehicles and machines perceive the world more accurately and efficiently. And I know that all sounds technical, but the way she talks, it makes you feel like you're getting a front row seat to the
Mm,
future. and that you really can imagine, what her work is accomplishing and the importance of it. So I watched her session at CES, and it was called "Physical AI and the Big Bang of Robotics and Autonomous Vehicles." I just learned so much. But, even before I get into the content of what she and the other speakers spoke about, I have to say, seeing her on stage with three men, just confidently chilling there talking, it hit me in a really personal way. It was this quiet, powerful reminder that yes, even I have a place in AI innovation. And women do have a place in AI innovation. And I immediately thought, I can't wait to show my daughter this brilliant woman leading the conversation.
Love that.
So one of the things that really stuck with me was when she talked about what she does is her approach to building her company, Waabi. And the very first thing that they set out to do was not to create a robot or an autonomous vehicle, but it was to really focus on the simulator. And the way she explained it made so much sense. If you're going to train an autonomous system of any kind to operate safely in the real world, you need synthetic data, especially around physical AI. Like I mentioned in our last episode at CES, there was just so much conversation around physical AI. And
Absolutely.
synthetic data is just super important. You need millions of scenarios, edge cases, near misses, unpredictable human behavior, all the things you can't really reliably or safely recreate in real life. Safety is just so important
Huge.
and integral to their work, that I think that's why it takes so much longer than software. And also, you're building an actual physical product, three-dimensional. And so, anyway, that simulator becomes the foundation, and it's where the system learns, fails, improves, and eventually becomes safer than anything you could build by just throwing a robot onto the street and hoping for the best. And I don't even think it's probably not even legal to do
Yeah.
that.
You have to show the testing. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So, I was struck by her point about physical AI, meaning that it interacts with the real world. And so
Yeah.
it just has so many more barriers, like I was saying, than software based AI, right? Like me and my developers, we're just building things any time of day, any time of night. We can, test it anytime. You just test all day long into the night, go live. It's just a lot easier than physical AI. With physical AI, there's so much safety, regulation,
Absolutely.
reliability, and proving that your invention can actually outperform a human in the same situation is just a whole different level of the game. So that's the massive challenge, but it's also just such an exciting frontier that I didn't really know about until I watched her speak. So, she really focused on safety. It's just a whole ecosystem of innovation that we all typically never see. Here in Arizona, there's Waymos everywhere,
Everywhere.
right?
That was the first Waymo I used. It picked me up from the airport in Arizona. I loved
Yeah,
it.
I love
I
Waymo.
loved it.
Yeah. And, out here, a lot of our teenagers are being driven around in Waymos.
Yeah, I'm sure my daughter would love to use one.
Yeah, it's really crazy. But, the streets here are very like flat.
Flat,
It's a
yes.
very
It's a perfect
grid-like.
testing ground. Yeah.
I don't I don't think they could go on the freeway, which is a good thing.
No,
Anyway,
yeah.
so yeah, I could make the connection. I understand now that it really just is about safety, and we just don't see all that is involved in the area that she's playing in and just physical AI is playing in. So
Yeah.
it made me want to dive deeper into this space, and it's a cool area to explore. And it just reminded me of all the brilliance behind the scenes in physical AI and robotics, and how representation in AI and in her space is just so important.
Yeah, I definitely want to follow that company and her just to see, how they're evolving things. And I know from if you haven't listened to the CES episode, the one before this, definitely take a look at Jackie's recap because that was a big theme, the physical AI component. So I love that you chose this one to highlight as well.
Yeah, yeah, it was really cool to hear her speak.
Awesome. Well, to close it out, we have a fun segment with Keep It or Skip It, Women in AI, Women in Tech focused edition. And again, this is just pulling from our own opinions and experience of what we see in the market right now. So we'll talk about a topic and then we'll say whether we want to keep it or skip it. So the first one I brought up, I think, probably a couple years ago, this was more in the press, but women only network and private membership clubs. Chief is probably one of the bigger ones. that's out there now in terms of, it's a membership club, but explicitly for women and women only executives. So what are your feelings around those?
I say keep it as long as they have an accessible tier for women who need a more affordable tier. And yeah, how about you? Keep it or skip it?
Yeah, well, so full transparency, I was a founding member of Chief in LA when I worked at Google when they launched the LA component. So I really loved it. And I will say, I think for corporate women, what Chief is doing is super important because there's been hundreds of years of private membership, men only networks. And I mean,
yeah.
Only in the last, certain decades, we see women being invited into these clubs. But I do think there is a power and a safety of like a women only network. And when I was in LA, I didn't know anyone. I had moved there for Google to open the office. So I didn't have the network I had in the Bay Area. And it was a great way to meet people outside of tech too, the entertainment industry and the other ways, other really important industries in LA. And I still keep in touch with a lot of the women in my networking group there. So I do think it's super important. It can be very pricey. That one in particular, I would say it's more designed for corporate women where their company is, sponsoring them. But there are definitely more equitable and more like different tiers. And I think Chief is working on that too. I've seen some stuff where they're trying to have a different tier for women that are founders or women that are startup founders or entrepreneurs or solo entrepreneurs. So I'm a big keep it for that too. I think it's an important space to have for women who want to be a part of it.
Yeah, agreed. And there's plenty of other networking groups that have accessible tiers. There was one that I joined back in the day. I was in Elevate, and before it was Elevate, it was called like 21 Broad, something like that. I forget.
I remember that one.
So it was purchased and then rebranded to Elevate. And that made a huge difference in my career.
Totally.
So gosh, networking's super important. We should do a whole episode on that.
Yeah, right? Yeah. And there's plenty of co-ed networking too, I will say. Like if you want to be in a network that's regional or you want to be in a network for your industry. It's not to say like women only networking is the only way to go, but I think like, having a mix of opportunities and then people can choose what they want to do.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I like that one. So the next one is keep it or skip it, women in AI or tech forums conferences, specifically ones that highlight female founders and leaders. Katie, what do you think?
Yeah. So we just talked about a woman founder, and I think, there is a lack of like, we see on CES, I'm sure you were saying how you were like, wow, it's really refreshing to see this one woman in a sea of men on stage. I do think it's super important to have women only or women highlighted tech conferences. And that's not to say that like men couldn't be a part of that, but I think it's almost the reverse of what we see in CES, where maybe 70 to 80% of the speakers are women, and then we have men and other folks represented. But I do think it's important just because of the lack that we see. If there wants to be a female focused forum or panel as a part of something, or even just there's tons of women in tech conferences. I think the hard part about this is that the funding for a lot of these things is going down because of, the controversy around DEI and, current administration and things like that, which is a shame. So I do think if they can stay out there, it's important. Or maybe they tag up with other groups and together bring some things, or like be a panel as a part of CES or South by Southwest. I think that's great too. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there for this to grow.
Yeah, I mean it's a keep it, and I like the idea of having forums within larger events. Just throughout history, we just have to be reminded constantly. We can't stop reminding society to have diverse voices. Yes. I mean, we have to keep reminding each other of it, even if, as you get older, maybe some people get tired of it. We have to teach the next generation. We have to keep it. It's always important. And yeah. So
yeah, and I think there's always just this
examples.
Fear of like tokenism. Are you only hiring or highlighting me because I'm a woman, or are we not getting the same quality we would get? Or, those are always like kind of the backlash. But I think no, it still definitely needs to be a part, whether it's a standalone conference or it's something inside of a larger conference, which I think is great too.
Yeah, and you made a good point there. I think it's very important that when we invite women to panels to speak, to have on a podcast, it doesn't always have to be, oh, this is a woman in tech. No, yes. She is a leader. She is an expert in tech. It doesn't matter what her gender is. You don't always have to label it that she happens to be a woman. These experts happen to be women, but they are experts. They are leaders. They are educated, they are visionaries. And so we do definitely need to make sure the messaging around it points that out.
Yeah, I think that's important.
Good
Awesome.
point.
All right. The last one I saw too, we see a lot of is female funding groups, female driven funding groups, whether that be, usually it's a group of women that get together and start it, but some of them have gotten into larger like VC and PE level where they say, we're a female funded group. We have all female partners that are going to review and quantify the businesses. And then we're only lending to female or underrepresented groups. That could be AI, in tech, or in business in general.
I think we have to keep it because of all the other reasons. There's angel investment groups like, you have Golden Seeds. They are investors that are men and women, but they do require their investment to be in organizations or businesses that are at least 51%, I think, are owned by a woman. And then there's a lot of other VCs that are popping up that will only invest in female founded companies. And again, it's important because we just need to keep diverse voices shaping our futures for ourselves, our community, our children. So they need to be funded. And, one critique, though, sometimes of some of these groups is I think that they can create their own playbook. Sometimes they use a similar playbook as a traditional angel or VC group, even though sometimes they claim they are doing things different. We could get into that in another episode.
Yeah,
but
that's a
I
good
think
example of like, what are you really doing different? Yeah.
I think there can be a different investment thesis completely and a different way of, just going
Even
through
the
and
mentoring, partnership,
and the opportunity. Yeah. So keep it.
I think this is a keep it for me too. Listen, the ecosystem of finance is large and traditionally male. So if you're a male startup, I don't think it's discrimination to say like maybe there's some funds that won't loan to you. I think there's plenty of opportunities out there for everyone.
Yes.
But I do think I know a lot of female founders and, they feel a lot of confidence like in pitching to these groups. Sometimes that's the first groups they pitch to because it's a welcoming environment. It's an environment where they maybe feel a little less cutthroat and a little more supportive, to your point. So I do think this is really important for the ecosystem of innovation and investment that we have groups like this where people feel comfortable and that have, this as their priority. I think that's fine. There's plenty of other investment groups that highlight we're investing in Black business, Hispanic business, and that's great too. I think, if you're giving the money, you can say who it goes to, right? And you can have a purview of why that's important to you. So I think it's good. Like you said, I'd love to see like even more diversity around the different kinds of female funding groups we have, whether it's like an AI focus or, I think it's hard to just say we invest in female startups in general. So I have seen more trends of like female focused healthcare founders, AI based businesses.
So much of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And please, not all pink branding and I'm not a pink girly. So that kind of immediately turns me off.
Yeah, use it sparingly. I do think that there is a challenge right now, though. We need more high net worth female individuals to become investors. And I think that is a challenge we have right now, that there's not enough of them. A lot of them are still giving to nonprofit primarily, which is needed. But we need to educate these women that there is another way to grow what you have and you can continue to give to nonprofit. And we have a lot of work to do still around.
Yeah, that's where some of the angel networks or like community driven groups come into play around investment and banding together. Yeah. And I think that becomes almost a combination of what we were talking about is like women networking plus investing. It can be like both. So I do think that's more appealing. The networking in the community is more appealing for women when you're putting together a group like that.
Awesome.
Excellent. So great discussion. I know that we're not going to cover everything in the world, women in AI. So this is definitely a topic we want to visit again, but thank you for joining Bot Boundaries. I hope you learned something about women in AI, where we still have a lot of runway for progress and equity, but also I hope you're inspired to hear about many of the advantages and opportunities that can present themselves when we have gender balance in the creation and execution of AI infrastructure and products.
Yeah, yes. Fabulous. So good seeing you today, Katie. Where can everyone find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Katie Wilson on LinkedIn, or Serious Moonlight Consulting is my business name. And on Instagram, my business is at Serious Moonlight Consulting. And how about you, Jackie?
Yeah, find me on LinkedIn at Jackie Gutierrez and on Instagram and TikTok at Business Growth Gal. And please follow Bob Boundaries on at Bob Boundaries on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. So thanks for listening. As always, make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We're available on all platforms and on YouTube too. Bye, Katie. Good to see you.
Bye. Good to see you.